The twin moons of IV hung low over the sacred river, casting silver light across the water. They had gathered along the shore, hundreds of them standing in perfect silence. Their copper scales caught the moonlight and made them look like statues carved from metal. They had stood in this same place for 12,000 years, performing the same ritual whenever the moons aligned. Tonight was no different. Lyra stood at the front of the crowd, her small body trembling despite her best efforts to stay still. She was 16 cycles old, barely an adult by standards, and she had known this moment would come since she was a child. Her scales had grown in wrong. They were pale and thin where they should have been thick and dark. Her arms lacked the muscle that her peers developed naturally. She could not hunt. She could not fight. She could not do any of the things that made a worthy of life. The elders called it the offering. Every generation, when the twin moons aligned, the tribe selected its weakest member and gave them to the Great Maw. The creature had lived in the sacred river for as long as anyone could remember. It was massive, nearly 40 feet long, with armored scales that could turn aside any blade and jaws that could crush stone. They did not worship it exactly, but they respected it. They fed it. And in return, the Great Maw kept their bloodline strong by removing those who would weaken it. Elder stepped forward, his bronze scales dulled with age but his eyes still sharp. He had performed this ritual 37 times. He knew the words by heart. He raised his clawed hands to the sky and spoke in the old language, calling upon the spirits of their ancestors to witness the offering. The crowd responded in unison, their voices rising and falling like waves. Lyra did not cry. Crying was for those who believed they deserved better. She had accepted her fate long ago. Her mother had wept when Lyra was born and the healers saw how thin her scales were. Her father had refused to look at her. She had grown up knowing she was a burden, a mistake, a flaw in the perfect chain of strength. The offering was not punishment. It was simply the natural order of things. The water began to stir. Half a mile away, hidden in the dense forest that bordered the river, a group of humans watched through high-powered binoculars. Doctor pressed the lenses against his eyes and felt his stomach turn as he realized what was happening. The research team had been studying them from a distance for 3 days, documenting their society and culture without making contact. First contact protocols were strict. They were supposed to observe and record, nothing more. Cultural contamination was the greatest sin a survey team could commit. "They're going to sacrifice her," said, his voice flat with disbelief. "That's what this is. They're feeding her to that thing." Dr. Amy Price lowered her own binoculars and shook her head. "We can't interfere. You know the rules. Indigenous practices are protected under Galactic Survey Corps Regulation 12.3. We have no right to impose our values on their society." "Our values? Amy, they're about to murder a child. By their standards, they're maintaining the health of their species. It's not murder to them. It's sacred." Watched as the young female walked toward the water's edge. She moved slowly, her pale scales almost glowing in the moonlight. She was so small compared to the others, so fragile, and she was walking to her death without a single person trying to stop her. The water erupted. The Great Maw rose from the depths like a nightmare given flesh. Its head alone was the size of a small vehicle, covered in black and green scales that looked harder than steel. Its eyes were yellow and ancient, filled with a hunger that had been satisfied by flesh for countless generations. It opened its jaws, revealing rows of teeth as long as forearm. The young female did not run. She stood perfectly still, waiting for the end. Was moving before he made the conscious decision to act. He burst from the tree line and sprinted toward the river, ignoring Amy's shouts behind him. His boots pounded against the soft earth. His heart hammered in his chest. He had no plan, no weapon besides the small field knife on his belt, and absolutely no chance of success. But he could not stand there and watch someone die. They turned at the sound of his approach, their golden eyes wide with shock. They had heard rumors of the aliens who landed beyond the mountains, but none had expected to see one charging toward their sacred ceremony like a madman. Some of the warriors reached for their weapons, but they were too surprised to act. Hit the water at full speed and felt the warm current drag at his legs. The great maw had begun its approach toward the young female, its massive tail propelling it forward with terrifying grace. Could see her standing there, frozen, accepting her fate with a dignity that broke his heart. He dove. The water closed over his head and everything became muffled and dark. He could see the creature's bulk ahead of him, a shadow against the moonlit surface. He kicked hard, pushing himself forward and grabbed onto the ridged scales of its back just as it passed beneath him. The great maw thrashed violently, confused by the sudden weight on its back. It had never been attacked before. It had never needed to defend itself. It was the apex predator of this world, the undisputed master of the sacred river. And now something small and soft was clinging to its scales. Held on with everything he had. His fingers found the gaps between the armored plates and locked in place. He pulled the field knife from his belt with his free hand. It was a small thing, meant for cutting plant samples and emergency repairs. Against a creature this size, it was almost laughable. But was not laughing. He drove the blade into the soft tissue behind the creature's skull, right where the armor plates left a gap. The great maw roared, a sound that felt in his bones more than heard with his ears. It rolled, dragging him underwater, spinning and thrashing in a desperate attempt to dislodge this impossible attacker. His lungs burned. His grip began to slip. The world was nothing but chaos and blood and the terrible pressure of the creature's movements. He stabbed again and again, his arms screaming with the effort. And then suddenly, the great maw went still. Surfaced, gasping for air, and found himself face to face with the young female he had risked everything to save. Her golden eyes were wide with an emotion he could not read. Behind her, on the shore, the entire tribe stood frozen in absolute silence. "Why?" she asked, her voice translator rendering the word in flat, mechanical English. "Why would you die for the unworthy?" Coughed water and managed a weak smile despite the pain in every part of his body. "Where I come from," he said, "nobody is unworthy." The sacred river ran red with the blood of the great maw. Its massive body floated in the shallows, motionless, its yellow eyes staring at nothing. For 12,000 years it had ruled these waters. For 12,000 years it had accepted the offerings of thee and maintained the balance of their world. Now it was dead, killed by a creature without scales or claws or any of the markers of strength he understood. Dragged himself onto the shore, his body aching in ways he had never experienced before. The great maw had nearly killed him 3 times during their struggle. His ribs felt cracked. His left arm hung limp at his side. Blood from a dozen cuts mixed with the river water dripping from his torn uniform. But he was alive, and so was the girl he had jumped into the water to save. Lyra followed him onto the shore, her pale scales dripping wet. She had not moved during the entire fight. She had simply stood there, watching, unable to comprehend what was happening. The soft creature had attacked the great maw for her. He had risked his life, had nearly lost his life, for someone the universe had already declared worthless. Nothing in her education or experience had prepared her for this moment. The tribe remained frozen on the riverbank. Hundreds of golden eyes stared at with a mixture of fear and confusion. Elder stood at the front, his aged scales trembling with an emotion that looked like rage but might have been something else entirely. Behind him, the warriors gripped their weapons but made no move to attack. They did not know what to do. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Amy Price and the rest of the human research team emerged from the tree line, their faces pale with shock. Amy ran to and helped support his weight, her eyes scanning his injuries with professional concern. "You absolute idiot," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've violated first contact protocols. You've killed a sacred creature. You've probably started a war." "I saved a life," said simply. "That matters more." Elder stepped forward, his clawed feet sinking into the soft mud of the riverbank. The crowd parted around him like water around a stone. His secondary eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of deep agitation among the. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of tradition. "You have committed sacrilege," he said, his translator rendering the words in cold, precise English. "You have violated our sacred waters. You have killed the great Maw, guardian of our bloodline. You have stolen our offering from the jaws of balance itself." Straightened as much as his injured body would allow, he gently pushed Amy aside and faced the elder directly. "With respect, elder, I could not stand by and watch someone die for being different." "Different?" His head tilted at an angle that suggested confusion. "The female is not different, she is weak. Weakness is not a variation. Weakness is failure. Weakness is a flaw that must be removed before it spreads. On my world, we have a different view of these things." "Your world?" His tail swept the ground behind him, leaving a furrow in the mud. "What could your world possibly know of strength? Look at you. You have no scales, you have no claws. Your teeth are flat and useless. Your skin tears at the slightest touch. By every measure we understand, you are weaker than the weakest of us." Nodded slowly. "You're right. Physically, I'm nothing compared to your people. A child could probably kill me in a fair fight." He glanced back at the floating corpse of the great Maw. "But I just killed your sacred guardian with a knife meant for cutting plants. How do you explain that?" The crowd murmured. This was the question that none of them could answer. The human was weak by every standard they knew, and yet he had done the impossible. He had leapt onto the back of the most dangerous creature on their world and stabbed it to death through sheer determination. No had ever even attempted such a thing. No would have been foolish enough to try. "Madness," one of the warriors called out. "The soft creature is simply mad. He does not understand fear." "Oh, I understand fear," said. "I was terrified the entire time. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the knife. I swallowed so much water I thought I would drown before the creature could kill me." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I did it anyway. That's what humans do. We feel fear and we act despite it." Lyra stepped forward, placing herself between and the elder. It was a bold move, the kind of move that a weak female should never make. But something had changed inside her during those moments in the water. Something had broken loose. "He saved my life," she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "He owes me nothing. His people owe us nothing. We are strangers to each other. And yet he jumped into the sacred river and fought the great Maw with his bare hands." She turned to face her tribe, her pale scales catching the moonlight. "Does that sound like weakness to you?" The silence stretched on for a long moment. They looked at each other, uncertainty plain on their faces. Their entire worldview had been built on a simple foundation. Strength was everything. The strong protected the tribe. The weak endangered it. There was no room for nuance, no space for exceptions. But the human had shown them something they could not explain away. He had shown them that strength came in forms they had never imagined. Elder raised one clawed hand, and the murmuring stopped instantly. His golden eyes studied for a long time, searching for something. Finally, he spoke. "The council will deliberate on this matter. Until we reach a decision, the humans will remain here as our guests." He paused, his secondary eyelids flickering. "Or our prisoners. The distinction may depend on the outcome of our discussions." Two warriors stepped forward and gestured for the human team to follow them. Amy started to protest but shook his head. "We'll go with them," he said quietly. "We've done enough damage for one night. Let's not make things worse." As they were led away from the riverbank, Lyra watched them go. Her golden eyes never left his face. He had changed everything with one impossible act. He had shattered 12,000 years of tradition in the space of a few heartbeats, and he had done it for her, a female who had been born to die. She did not understand why, but she was determined to find out. The council chamber was built into the side of a cliff, carved from the living rock by generations of craftsmen. Torches lined the walls, their flickering light casting dancing shadows across the ancient stone. The 7 elders sat in a semicircle at the far end of the chamber, their bronze scales gleaming like old armor. They had been debating for 2 days now, and still they could not reach a decision. And his team had been given a small cave near the edge of the village. It was comfortable enough, with soft bedding made from some kind of local plant fiber, and a constant supply of food that the humans found edible if somewhat bland. Guards stood at the entrance at all times, but they made no move to restrict the team's movements within the village itself. It was an unusual kind of imprisonment. On the second night, Lyra came to see. She moved quietly, slipping past the guards with a skill that surprised him. For someone supposedly weak, she was remarkably good at not being noticed. She found him sitting alone near the cave entrance, staring up at the twin moons that had started all of this. "You should be resting," she said, settling down beside him. Her pale scales seemed to glow in the moonlight, and noticed for the first time that they were not simply pale. They shifted colors as she moved, catching light in ways that the darker scales of other could not. It was beautiful, though he suspected her people did not see it that way. "I could say the same to you," replied. "Aren't you supposed to be dead?" Lyra made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Yes, I suppose I am. The great maw should be digesting me right now. Instead, I am sitting here talking to the creature who killed it." She paused, her golden eyes studying his face. "My people do not know what to make of you. The elders have been arguing since the ceremony. Some want to execute you for sacrilege. Others want to honor you for your courage. A few have suggested that you might be some kind of spirit sent to test us. What do you think?" "I think you are very strange," Lyra said honestly. "Your body is soft and fragile. You have no natural weapons. You cannot run as fast as we can or swim as well or see as far. By every measure my people use to judge worth, you should be less than nothing." She tilted her head, the gesture so similar to elders that had to smile. "And yet you did something that no has ever done. You attacked the Great Maw and won." "I got lucky." "No, luck does not explain what I saw." Lyra's voice dropped lower as if she was afraid someone might overhear. "You were afraid. I could see it in your eyes, in the way your hands trembled. You knew you would probably die, and you did it anyway. Why?" Was quiet for a long moment, searching for the right words. This was the question that defined humanity, the answer that separated them from so many other species in the galaxy. It was not strength or intelligence or technology that made humans special. It was something much simpler and much more terrifying. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "I saw someone in trouble, someone who needed help, and I acted. I didn't think about the consequences or the odds or what might happen to me afterward. I just moved. But you owed me nothing. We had never met. I was a stranger to you, a member of a species you had only observed from a distance. How could saving my life be worth risking your own?" "That's exactly why it was worth it." Turned to face her fully, his eyes intense. "Where I come from, we believe that every life has value, not because of what someone can do or how strong they are or how useful they might be. Every life has value simply because it exists. The weakest child and the strongest warrior are equally precious." Lyra stared at him as if he had just claimed the sky was green. "That makes no sense. A child cannot protect the tribe. A weak warrior cannot hunt or fight. How can they have the same value as those who contribute?" "Because value isn't about contribution. It's about being alive, being aware, having hopes and fears and dreams." Smiled gently. "Let me ask you something. Before I jumped into that river, what were you thinking about?" Lyra's scales shifted color, darkening slightly in what recognized as embarrassment. "I was thinking about my mother. She died 3 cycles ago, but I still miss her. I was hoping that wherever her spirit went, she would not be ashamed of me." "Was your mother strong?" "No, she was like me. Her scales were thin, her body was weak. She was never selected for the offering because she was clever enough to make herself useful in other ways. She became a weaver, creating the nets and ropes our hunters use. Lyra's voice softened. She taught me everything she knew. She told me that even the weakest river eventually carves through stone. She sounds wonderful. She was. Lyra blinked and realized with surprise that she was crying. The tears were different from human tears, thicker and more golden, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. She would have liked you, I think. She always said that there was more to strength than muscle and scale. Reached out and gently touched her arm. Her scales were cool and smooth beneath his fingers like polished glass. Your mother was right, and so were you. The weakest river does carve through stone, given enough time. Humans figured that out a long time ago. We learned that the people who seem weakest often have gifts that the strong cannot see. What kind of gifts? All kinds. The child who cannot hunt might grow up to be the one who invents better hunting tools. The warrior who cannot fight might become the healer who saves wounded soldiers. The female with thin scales might become the diplomat who prevents wars before they start. Smiled. Every person has something to offer. The trick is finding out what that something is. Lyra was quiet for a long time, processing his words. She had spent her entire life believing she was worthless, a burden to her tribe, a flaw that should have been eliminated at birth. Now this strange, soft creature was telling her that everything she had been taught was wrong. It was too much to accept, too radical to believe. And yet she wanted to believe it. She wanted it more than she had ever wanted anything. The council will make their decision tomorrow, she said finally. Whatever they decide, I want you to know that you changed something inside me. I do not understand it yet, but I feel different than I did before you jumped into that river. Nodded, that's a good place to start. Lyra rose to leave but paused at the cave entrance. In my language, your name sounds like the word for unexpected storm. I think that is fitting. She slipped past the guards and disappeared into the night, leaving alone with the twin moons and the strange new future they had created together. The morning of the third day dawned gray and heavy with clouds. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the air smelled of coming rain. The believed that storms were messages from the ancestors, signs that the spirit world was watching. Today, it seemed, the ancestors had a great deal to say. Stood at the entrance of the cave and watched the villagers prepare for the council's announcement. They moved with nervous energy, their copper scales catching what little light filtered through the clouds. He could see fear in their faces, confusion in their movements. Their entire world had been turned upside down in a single night, and they did not know how to set it right again. Amy approached him, her expression grim. I've been monitoring communications with the survey ship, she said quietly. Command is not happy. They're talking about pulling us out, declaring this planet off-limits for human contact. Because I saved a girl's life. Because you killed a sacred creature, violated first contact protocols, and potentially destabilized an entire civilization. Amy sighed and ran a hand through her hair. I understand why you did it. I probably would have done the same thing if I'm being honest. But the consequences of your actions could affect human relations for generations. Or they could improve them, replied. We don't know yet. That's what scares command. They don't like uncertainty. The sound of drums interrupted their conversation. Deep, rhythmic beats echoed across the village, calling the people to gather. Recognized the pattern from his observations over the past 3 days. This was the summons to hear the council's decision. The gathering place was a wide clearing at the center of the village, surrounded by ancient trees that had been growing since before the learn to carve stone. The entire tribe had assembled, nearly 2,000 individuals standing in concentric circles around a raised platform. The 7 elders stood on the platform, their bronze scales making them look like statues from a forgotten age. And his team were led to a spot near the front, close enough to see the elders' faces clearly. Lyra stood nearby, separated from her people by an invisible wall of uncertainty. She was not one of them anymore, but she was not one of the humans either. She existed in a space between worlds. Elder raised his clawed hands, and the drums fell silent. His voice carried across the clearing, amplified by the natural acoustics of the surrounding trees. "People of the," he began, "we have deliberated for 3 days on the events of the sacred ceremony. We have consulted the ancient texts. We have sought guidance from the spirits of our ancestors, and we have reached a decision that will shape the future of our tribe." The crowd shifted, thousands of scales rustling like leaves in the wind. Felt his heart beating faster. Whatever happened next would determine not only his fate but possibly the fate of 2 civilizations. "The human known as violated our most sacred traditions," continued. "He entered the sacred waters without permission. He attacked and killed the great Maw, guardian of our bloodline for 12,000 years. He stole our offering from the jaws of balance." Braced himself for the sentence. Execution seemed likely. They were not a cruel people, but they took their traditions seriously. What he had done was beyond forgiveness by their standards. "However," said, and his voice changed subtly, taking on a note that might have been wonder, "he did so not for himself but for another. He risked his life to save a stranger, a member of a species he had never met. He fought a creature 10 times his size with nothing but a small blade and his own determination." The elder paused, his golden eyes scanning the crowd. "We have long believed that strength is the only measure of worth. The strong protect the tribe. The weak endanger it. This is the foundation of our society, the principle that has guided us for 100 generations." He turned to look directly at. "But the human has shown us something we did not expect. He has shown us that strength can take forms we never imagined. Courage without muscle. Determination without claws. A will that does not yield even when facing certain death." Stepped down from the platform and walked toward, his movements slow and deliberate. The crowd parted before him like the sea before a great ship. When he reached, he stopped and studied the human with ancient eyes. "I have killed many creatures in my life," said quietly. "I have fought in 3 wars and survived wounds that would have killed lesser warriors. I am considered one of the strongest of my generation." He paused, his secondary eyelids flickering. "But I would not have done what you did. I would not have jumped into that river for a stranger, knowing that death was almost certain. I would have told myself that it was not my concern, that the traditions must be respected, that one life was not worth such risk." He reached out and placed a clawed hand on shoulder. The touch was gentle, almost fatherly. "You have shown me that my strength is not as complete as I believed. You have shown all of us that there are kinds of courage we have never learned." Turned to face the crowd. "The council has decided the human will not be punished for his actions. Instead, he will be honored as a warrior of exceptional bravery." He raised his voice, letting it carry to every corner of the clearing. "And the offering is ended. From this day forward, no will be sacrificed for weakness. We will find new ways to measure worth, new standards that account for the gifts we cannot see." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some cheered, their voices rising in approval. Others protested, their scales darkening with anger at the abandonment of tradition. Arguments broke out across the clearing, 12,000 years of certainty crumbling in a single moment. But Lyra was not listening to the arguments. She was staring at, her pale scales shimmering with colors that no one had ever noticed before. Tears streamed down her face, golden and thick, but for the first time in her life they were tears of joy. She was alive, not because she had proven herself worthy by standards, not because she had become strong or useful or valuable. She was alive because a stranger had decided that her life mattered simply because it existed. And her people were beginning to understand why. 6 months had passed since the night jumped into the sacred river. The twin moons had completed their cycle twice, and the world of IV had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. They were still adjusting to their new reality, still learning what it meant to value life beyond the simple measure of physical strength. It was not an easy transition. 12,000 years of tradition did not disappear overnight. but they were trying. Stood at the edge of the village, watching a group of young practice combat techniques with wooden weapons. Among them was a small female with pale, iridescent scales. She was not the fastest or the strongest, but she moved with a grace that the others lacked. She had learned to use her size to her advantage, slipping past larger opponents and striking from unexpected angles. Her teachers called her the Ghost, and they meant it as a compliment. Lyra finished her training session and jogged over to join. Her scales were slick with sweat, and her breathing was heavy, but her eyes were bright with accomplishment. In the months since her rescue, she had transformed from a girl waiting to die into a young woman determined to live. "You're getting better," said, offering her a water flask. "I have good motivation." Lyra drank deeply and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "The Council has asked me to serve as their liaison to the Galactic Survey Corps. They want me to learn human ways, to help bridge the gap between our peoples. That's a huge responsibility." "It is also exactly what you told me I might find." Lyra smiled, her golden eyes warm. "You said that every person has something to offer. You said the trick is finding out what that something is. I think I am beginning to understand what you meant." They walked together through the village, passing homes and shops and gathering places that had stood unchanged for centuries. But change was coming, whether they wanted it or not. Human engineers had begun working with craftsmen to improve their building techniques. Human doctors were sharing medical knowledge that would double the average. Human teachers were opening schools where young could learn about the galaxy beyond their world. Not everyone was happy about these changes. A faction of traditionalists still believed that the old ways were better, that the offering had kept their bloodline strong, that humans were corrupting their culture. They held protests and made speeches and sometimes caused trouble in the streets, but their numbers were shrinking with each passing month. The future was arriving, and most wanted to be part of it. Elder met them near the council chamber. He had aged visibly in the past 6 months, his bronze scales fatting to a dull gray. But his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was still clear. He had become one of the strongest advocates for change, surprising many who had expected him to cling to tradition. He said, inclining his head in greeting, "I have news from your survey command. They have officially approved full diplomatic relations between our peoples. The first ambassador will travel to Earth next cycle." "That's wonderful," said. "Who did you choose?" Secondary eyelids flickered in what had learned to recognize as amusement. "We chose the one who understands humans best, the one who has already proven that she can bridge the gap between our worlds." He looked at Lyra. "If she is willing." Lyra's scales shifted through a rainbow of colors, betraying her surprise. "Me. But I am not qualified. I am not strong or important. I was the offering just 6 months ago." "And that is exactly why you are perfect for this task," replied. "You understand what it means to be underestimated. You know how it feels to be judged by standards that do not account for your true worth. You can teach others what you have learned." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Our people need to see that the weakest among us can become the most important. There is no better example than you." Lyra looked at uncertainty plain on her face. He smiled and nodded encouragingly. "You can do this," he said. "You've already done the hard part. You survived, you changed, you grew. Now you get to help others do the same thing." "I am scared," she admitted. "Good, that means you understand how important this is." Reached out and took her hand, her cool scales smooth against his warm skin. "Remember what I told you that night by the river. Humans feel fear and we act despite it. That's what makes us who we are. And I've seen you do the same thing, Lyra. You are braver than you know." Lyra straightened her spine and lifted her chin. The gesture was so human that made a sound of surprise. She had already begun to change, already begun to blend the best of both worlds. "I accept," she said, her voice steady. "I will be the ambassador to Earth." That evening, the tribe gathered for a celebration unlike any in their history. Humans and danced together around great bonfires, sharing food and stories and laughter. The drums that had once called the people to watch the offering now beat out rhythms of joy and hope. Children of both species played together in the firelight, discovering that friendship needed no translation. Found a quiet spot away from the celebration and looked up at the twin moons. They were full tonight, hanging low over the sacred river just as they had been 6 months ago. The water was calm and dark, the great maw nothing but a memory. Soon another creature would claim the river, some natural predator that would hunt without ceremony or tradition. Life would go on as it always did. Lyra joined him, her iridescent scales glowing in the moonlight. She stood beside him in comfortable silence, watching the moons trace their ancient path across the sky. "I used to fear these moons," she said softly. "I knew that when they aligned, my time would come. I would walk into the water and never return. That was the only future I could imagine. And now—" She turned to look at him, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight from the celebration behind them. "Now I see a future I never dreamed was possible, a future where I matter, a future where my weakness became my strength." She paused, and when she spoke again her voice was thick with emotion. "You gave me that. You jumped into the river for a stranger and you changed everything." Shook his head. "I just did what felt right. You did the hard work yourself." "That is what makes your people so remarkable," Lyra said. "You do what feels right without counting the cost. You see someone in trouble and you act, even when it makes no logical sense, even when it might cost you everything." She reached out and touched his hand gently. "The galaxy has no idea what it invited in when it discovered humanity, but I think they will learn. We will all learn." In the distance, the celebration continued. Humans and dancing together, two species joined by an act of impossible courage. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and conflicts that neither side could predict. But it was a future where every life had value, where weakness was not a death sentence, where a small female with pale scales could stand before the stars and represent her entire world. And it had all started with one man, one moment, one leap into the darkness. Some said it was madness, others called it courage, but they had a new word for it now, borrowed from the human language and adapted to their own tongue. They called it hope.